Hello Canada, welcome back to another edition of the Canadian Citizen Journal. I'm your host, alias Tagai. Well, today is a pretty big day. It's kind of being, ignored, which is typical of our propaganda here in Canada, especially how they're so complicit in trying to cover up the importance of this anniversary of Air India Flight 182. The kicker to the whole story is not only how CSIS was aware of what was going on, Trudeau Sr. was aware of what was going on, there was mole within CSIS, there was a whole bunch of evidence showing that pretty much Canada in general was complicit with what was going on and covered it up. And now they're just doing their yearly, we'll call them puff pieces, trying to just kind of bury all of the realities and truths about what led up to Flight 182 and the connections of where we are today. Now, as always, I urge you to like, share, and subscribe. But I also always say, check my previous episodes. Now, I've done a few series on this. I urge you to check out. I'm going to link them in the description below, as with all my evidence that I always do. There is a lot of damning evidence showing what is going on today with the Nisjar murder, a few other murders, all of the drugs, which again I did an episode a week ago on, all the ties to, from the towing, the drugs, the trafficking, gun smuggling, all being linked to this Khalistani movement. Now, I'm going to focus the first part of this show just on Flight 182. And I'm going to show you, of course, CBC's response to it, and then interlink it to part 2, which I'll be following up right after. I'm going to start off with what I would deem as being one of the best, we'll call it a short doc, done by Indian media, and I'm a really big fan of First Post and a couple of the journalists that work there. Without further ado, let's just get started on this. I can never say her name, so I'm not going to attempt to. But this lady in general is amazing, and she does a fabulous job. But she's missing out a lot of key evidence that I don't know if maybe she wasn't able to find. I'm not quite sure, but I found it. I've got lots of documents on this. Stuff that I can't actually share because there's lots of dead ends, which I'm going to show you as well, right to our Government of Canada site, taking us to information that we're supposed to have access to, but was all of a sudden snubbed and silenced during the Trudeau era. And I was trying to get these documents for the first series I did, and I've been trying. So anyways, without further ado, let's just do a quick memory lane on Air India Flight 182 on today, the 40th anniversary of the largest terror attack before 9/11 done on a plane by, well, supposed Canadians on supposed Indians that were actually Canadians.
It was June 23rd, 1985. Air India Flight 182 departed from Toronto in Canada. It was headed to Mumbai. The flight was a Boeing 747, a wide-bodied jumbo jet. The plane was named after an Indian emperor. It was called Kanishk. Before Mumbai, Kanishk had a few stops. The first was in Montreal. Canadian officials searched the plane. They removed 3 suspicious packages. And then it was on to London. That's the second stop before flying to Mumbai. But Flight 182 never made it to London. Around 45 minutes before its arrival, the plane vanished. It disappeared from the radar. No communication, no distress signal. Simply vanished. Its last location was just off the Irish coast. So an emergency crew was dispatched. And what did they find? Debris. There was an explosion mid-air and the jet disintegrated. There were 329 people on board. All of them were killed. Only 131 bodies were recovered from the sea. Canada suspected a Khalistani hand. Just 1 year ago, in 1984, Operation Blue Star had happened in India. The Indian Army had breached the Golden Temple. They killed Khalistani terrorists lodged inside, so Canada connected the dots. They realized the plane bombing was revenge. But how many people did they punish for this attack? 1. Just 1 accused was convicted in this case. The mastermind himself was let off. Which makes you wonder, what exactly happened? How did Canadian intelligence not know about this attack? How were bombs carried onto the plane? And how did the terrorists escape justice? Time for a flashback.
So, there is a lot more to this story, which I said she didn't really put in there, that I'm going to be talking about right afterwards. But what I'm going to do is I'm also going to prove to you how this entire movement is all part of a larger picture. Now, I've discussed this in, like I said, the series I've done. I believe in total, I've done 2 different miniseries, one 3-part with the Trudeaus, the links to the Liberal Party, and how Carney's complicit in what's going on. And then I followed it up again because of what was going on with all of the drugs and the trafficking and everything on another 2-part series. Now, this is going to have, of course, this part as just a refresher. But I'm also going to show a whole bunch of other information that I shouldn't say I was looking forward to this day. I wasn't, because this is a sad day this is a stain on Canada's history. But as I say a lot of times, I can't do 50-part series. There's so much information. So as time goes on, with anniversaries like this, it gives me the ability to show you even more. And I'm going to show you that, especially with what's going on the attacks in Iran, and by the way, Iran has officially attacked United States operations. This is going on. The organizations that are behind the evil Islamic regime that controls Iran, that is funded by China, are all part of this Pakistani Khalistan movement. Let's just finish this little doc and then we'll dive deep.
The story of this bombing begins with one man, Talvinder Singh Parmar. He was a Khalistani terrorist. He founded a terror group called Babbar Khalsa. And in 1985, he plotted the Kanishk bombing. But his journey begins much earlier. In 1970, Parmar moved to Canada. 6 years later, he became a citizen. Now, most people immigrate for a fresh start. Parmar immigrated for a cover to carry on his anti-India activities. In 1981, he was accused of killing policemen in Punjab. Parmar fled to Germany. He was arrested by German authorities, but they refused to extradite him. So Parmar spent around 1 year in jail. Eventually, he was let off the hook. When he went to Canada, India tried again. Canada was asked to hand him over, to extradite him. It should have been a routine process. Canada and India were friendly nations, also Commonwealth members. But their Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, had other plans. He rejected the extradition, and his reason was pathetic. Pierre Trudeau apparently did not think that India was deferential enough to the Queen, so no extradition. Canada would pay dearly for this mistake. Now we come to 1985. The attack on the Golden Temple had riled up Parmar. He was talking about revenge. And Air India was the obvious target. Indians in Canada would often talk about it. They knew that something big was going to happen, and some would say, "Don't take an Air India flight." These murmurs reached Canadian intelligence, but they never took it seriously. Meanwhile, Parmar was busy plotting. He needed someone to make the bomb, and he settled on this man, Inderjeet Singh Rayat. Rayat was a fellow Khalistani. He doubled up as a car mechanic in Vancouver Island. So with the right manuals, he could make a bomb. And he did. Rayat ended up making 2 of them. One was for Kanishk. The second was for another Air India plane, a Tokyo-Bangkok jet. We'll get to that later. Canadian intelligence had many chances to prevent this attack. I'll tell you about one instance. Days before the bombing, Canadian spies were tailing Talvinder Parmar. They followed him to a forest. And once there, they heard explosions. Parmar and his aides were testing out the bombs. Guess what the Canadian spies did? Nothing. They thought the explosion was a gunshot. If only they had acted then, hundreds of lives could have been saved. But then again, Canada would get many more chances. After building the bomb, it was time to plant it. This is where an anonymous passenger comes in. Someone called Manjeet Singh. Now, we don't know who he was. We also don't know what he looked like. Chances are his name was fake. Manjeet Singh had booked a ticket on the same flight. The day before the attack, he also called the airlines because he was on the waiting list. "Doesn't matter," he said. "Check in my bag anyway." He deceived an air agent into putting his bag onto the plane. The passenger himself never came. You would think this is the hard part. Getting a bomb onto a plane, it should be tough, right? But thanks to Canada's top-class airport security, it wasn't. For starters, the sniffer dogs were not around. They had training that day. What about the X-ray machines? Apparently broken down. And the handheld sniffers? They did beep around the bag, but the security officials missed the warning. They were not trained to read it. So the bag with a bomb inside was placed in the aircraft. And when it reached near Ireland, it exploded. Now, I mentioned a second bomb. This one was placed on a flight to Tokyo. From Tokyo, it was supposed to be put on an Air India flight. But this bomb exploded early. 2 baggage handlers in Japan were killed. Apparently, Parmar and his accomplices got the timing wrong. Canada uses something called daylight saving time. They put their clocks 1 hour ahead during summer. Japan does not do that. And this time difference led to the early explosion. Back to Kanishk now. After the attack, Canada was slow to react. Air India flew the victims' families from Canada to London. When they reached there, they were shocked. There was no one from Canada present, no one to help them. The investigation was even worse. Parmar went underground after the attack. By 1988, he was in Pakistan. Now, with Parmar gone, Canada focused on 3 other people. Inderjeet Singh Rayat, the bomb maker, Ajayb Singh Bagri, Parmar's man Friday, and Ripudaman Singh Malik, the third accused. In 1991, Rayat was charged with possession of the bomb. Just one problem though, there was no proof. Canada could not make the charges stick. 1 year later, Parmar was captured in India, but he was killed in custody. So another dead end. By 1995, the Canadians were desperate. They were offering massive rewards. $1 million in exchange for information, and it worked. A Sikh journalist turned up with a smoking gun. He claimed to have heard conversations between the accused. But in 1998, he was murdered. His killers yet to be found. So in 2005, when the trial ended, there was just one conviction, that of Rayat, the bomb maker. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter. Let me repeat that. Manslaughter for an act of terrorism.
Manslaughter.
The other 2 accused walked out as free men. It was a case of gross injustice. Witnesses had been murdered, silenced, or bought. Evidence had been destroyed, and terrorists were let off the hook. The trial itself went into the record books. It dragged on for 2 decades. It cost around $130 million, the most expensive trial in Canada's history. But what was the point? In the end, those who were guilty walked away. Only Canada is to blame for what happened. They had specific details about the threat to Air India. Their former spy master confirmed this. James Bartleman. He says he got a classified document before the bombing. It said an Air India flight would be targeted that weekend, and the same weekend Kanishka was bombed. So why did Canada not act? The spy master says he handed over the information to security officials, but later Canada made a U-turn. They said Bartleman was lying, that he was misleading the victims as families. Now we can't be sure why Canada ignored so many red flags. Did race have something to do with it? If you ask some commentators, that is the case. After the Kanishk bombing, Canada's Prime Minister called his Indian counterpart. And what he did was strange. He offered condolences to the Indian Prime Minister. It may sound normal, so why was it strange? Because 280 of the victims were Canadian citizens. Most were of Indian origin, but they were Canadian. Only 24 were Indian citizens. If anyone should have extended condolences, it should have been the Indian Prime Minister. So the attitude was quite clear. The plane was Indian, the victims were of Indian origin, and the attackers motivated by Indian separatism. So Canada thought, not our problem. It was only in 2010 that they realized their mistake. Canada's then Prime Minister said sorry. Many called it a reset in India-Canada relations. But 13 years later, we are back to square one. The culprits of 1985 may be gone, but their ideology remains.
Now, where have we heard a reset to Canada-India relations with our supposed new Liberal Party? Lipstick on a pig, people. It's the same Liberal Party, just a new leader who, again, previous episodes, is totally complicit with what's going on with this Khalistani movement. Nothing's changed. They have completely infiltrated. This all goes back to China. China is backing up Pakistan, funding them with money, using Kashmir, using a certain area that was never really divided up between India and Pakistan, which this goes all the way back to Mahatma Gandhi. This is a proxy war that Canada is now a breeding ground, a central haven, hideout for not only the Khalistan, but also for Islamic extremists. These are all linked. They fund each other. I'm going to be showing you all that evidence right away. Let's just let this play out.
It was Pierre Trudeau shielding them in the 1980s. It's his son Justin Trudeau now. The Kanishk bombing revealed the truth about separatism and terrorism, a truth all of us know. Their target can be one country or community, but they will spread everywhere. There are no borders or loyalties for terrorism. It's a lesson Justin Trudeau is yet to learn.
Now, it's not just Justin Trudeau. It's Carney. But we're going to focus mainly on this whole flight. Like I said, and we're going to slowly break the pieces down, and I'm going to try to place them together conveniently and easily enough for you viewers to kind of grasp the reality, especially the deeper and deeper I dig, for you to absorb the reality of, well, what Canada has become and how deep the infiltration goes, not only into our government, not only into the RCMP, but into CSIS itself. This was some really key evidence that came forward because they had actually dialed the time wrong on that second. I'm showing you this because this is what a lot of the mainstream won't show you. And also, this had to do with a lot of the evidence that ended up coming forward in later years when they had an inquiry about this. Yes, Canada actually had an inquiry over 20 years after it happened due to a lot of pressure and Canada trying to reset relations with India. Out of it, they ended up being able to trace the purchaser of these components. This all came out in an inquiry. A lot of it never got brought to the public. It was all redacted. Where have we seen this before? Like every other inquiry, it ended up being more of a band-aid, an open cover-up with the use of propaganda to make Canadians think that we did this great investigation that really didn't do crap and never solved anything. Now I'm just going to go to current and show you the propaganda, and then we're going to dive right back in again.
Surrey resident Vijay Chakraborty remembers visiting the Air India Memorial near Cork, Ireland, almost 2 decades ago.
I was absolutely spellbound.
Chakraborty says the memorial made him think of those who lost their loved ones in the plane crash.
That touched me at that point, seeing the warmth of the local people, the way they had kept that whole thing in their memory.
On June 23, 1985, a bomb in a suitcase aboard Air India Flight 182 exploded as the plane approached Ireland. All 329 people on board were killed, many of them Canadians. Chakraborty.
Now take note at the bottom of the screen. They're pointing out that BC groups want a learning center to honor the Air India bombing victims.
Is part of a group that has written a letter to BC's Premier calling for a larger memorial and learning centre to be built in the province to teach younger generations about the tragedy.
My kids, they are being schooled here in Canada, in BC, and they have not heard about this. They need to know about, these things as a part of, their character building.
The campaign is being supported by many organizations, including local Hindu and Sikh faith groups.
We feel that our next generation should have an information center where they can learn about the tragedy that took place in 1985.
Yogesh Bhatia is a volunteer with Vedic Civics Charitable Society. He would like to see a space created that gives voice to the BC victims and their families.
At least, those people who were killed, their family still deserve something. So that's why we are asking a memorable place and an education center so that our future generations know that violence of any type can create massive ripple effect in the society.
In a written statement, the province says it will work with community and organizations to better understand how they can continue to work to educate future generations. Major Sidhu, who lost his sister and her 2 children in the terrorist attack, says the bombing is often perceived as a tragedy affecting the Indian community, while the majority of people on board the flight were Canadians.
Air India tragedy.
He says to this day it's known as Air India tragedy, but it's part of the Canadian history. This tragedy should be taught about in schools and colleges. 40 years later, families still feel anguish. He believes building a new learning center will create more empathy and understanding for Canadians. Saurabh Sandhu, CBC News, Vancouver.
Now, they've been calling for this for over 2 decades. And the reason that nothing's being done is because of, yes, the infiltration of the extremist Khalistan organization. Canada, especially BC, is as I said before, breeding ground. We're seeing the same things, the same type of teaching from these extremists being handed down to the younger generations, where kids at the age of 2, 3, 4, 5 end up, who have really no comprehension or ability to understand what's going on politically, nor should they even be involved, kicking at Modi, screaming, joining, wrapping themselves in these Khalistan extremist flags, preaching the word of separatism, end of Modi, this hate. Exactly like what we've seen in Palestine. This is the same type of propaganda that these extremists use in order to create and to ignite hate at an early age. Humans aren't born racist. We're not born hateful. You take a pile of kids and you put them in a room, they don't see color. They don't see race. They don't see religion. And real countries, serious countries, don't allow this in schools. And here we are. BC is thick with this. And we're going to tie more and more of this down, especially in part 2, because you will start to realize the Canadian government, especially the Liberal Party, CSIS, and it seems like the RCMP, are allowing it to happen. They're allowing this propaganda, this hate speech, this just complete immoral degradation of society to fester and grow. And there has to be reasoning to it. And there is. It's because they've all been infiltrated. Evil begets evil. Now, let's just keep listening and slowly diving a little deeper and deeper and deeper into the reality that Canada and the propaganda isn't talking about.
On the eve of the 40th anniversary of the deadliest terror attack in Canadian history, a haunting question finally got an answer, but without justice. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, also known as RCMP, confirmed the identity of the elusive Mr. X, a man long suspected of being involved in the 1985 Air India Kanishka bombing that killed 329 innocent people, most of them Canadian citizens of Indian origin.
Now, this is the man who actually planted the bombs. Is mainstream talking about this? This isn't Canadian TV. This is Midday India. Canada doesn't want the truth. They're covering it up. The government is covering it up. CSIS is covering it up. The RCMP are covering it up. They have known for decades who this man was. Every anniversary, they have known, they have gone out to these memorials, they've made this show of how they're trying to do the best they can, and they're going to protect all of these Canadians from it happening again, all the while knowing and protecting this individual.
But here's the shocking twist. Mr. X died without ever being charged. At a somber memorial in Canada, attended by dozens of grieving families, RCMP Assistant Commissioner David Tubol made the revelation public. While his real name remains hidden due to privacy laws, officials confirm that Mr. X was part of the bomb test team just weeks before the Air India flight 182 was blown up mid-air off the coast of Ireland. What we now know about Mr. X. On June 4, 1985, Mr. X travelled to Duncan, British Columbia with Talvinder Singh Parmar, the Babbar Khalsa leader and alleged mastermind of the plot. They met Indrajit Singh Riyat, the man who built the bomb, and entered the woods to test an improvised explosive device. The Canadian Security Intelligence
Now, supposedly, this is the idiocracy and naivety of our agencies and Canadian citizens. CSIS came out and said, oh, well, we did hear a boom, but we thought it was a gun. A gun. This bomb blew a chasm, knocked down like 30 some odd trees. It actually was large enough to be detected on Richter scale to those that were close to the seismological testing areas. And it was supposed to be a gun? And the most embarrassing part is the way media put it across. Most Canadians believed it. And to this day, they go, oh, yeah, I could see that. Yeah, I could see a gun doing that. Really?
Service was tracking them and even heard the blast, but wrongly assumed it was gunfire. No action was taken, no charges were filed, and Mr. X slipped into anonymity until now. The tragic timeline of the 1985 Air India Kanishka bombing. June 23, 1985. A suitcase bomb detonates aboard Air India Flight 182 from Montreal to Mumbai via London. 329 lives lost, including 82 children. Most victims were Canadians of Indian descent. The bombing remains the worst terrorist attack in Canadian history. Justice still denied. Indrajit Singh Riyad is the only person ever convicted. Talvinder Singh Parmar was killed in a police encounter in Punjab in 1992. Mr. X, whose identity the RCMP finally confirmed, died without trial. Despite decades of investigation, pain and pursuit, justice for the victims of Flight AI-182 remains tragically incomplete. As one family member said at the memorial, we finally know who Mr. X was, but we'll never hear him speak in court. That silence is louder than the bomb.
Unbelievably sad. Now, of all those people, there were only a couple that were named off, who were never charged. One of them fled and ended up being murdered in India. We're going to tie into this in part 2, because this is where all of a sudden the strings of all of the support come together. And it's through Pakistan. Now, India actually does not have a Khalistan problem. They ended it decades ago. And even then, they knew that it was Pakistan that was breeding this. And they knew that the money being funneled to get this Khalistan separatist movement going was all funded by China Now, while China was funding Pakistan, they had an order that went with the money. And it was feed the Islamic regime and the Khalistan movement and any other group or organization that we can use to pit against India. This went into different government branches in India that were running in politics and were all part of different drug cartels and different. So India knows that they have political parties that are funded by the radical Islamic regimes, the Khalistan regime, and the Chinese, because China hates India. The kicker is that Canada only ever names off the two that got away when they know that there were at least 60 individuals that were part and parcel to that Air India plot. Why were none of them named? And why were they flying and circumventing their extradition orders from countries that had signed extradition orders with India to end up back in Pakistan to be able to funnel money out of Canada that was being raised through drugs and trafficking and then allowed to go into India and assassinate people, then run back to India, and then fly back and circumvent all the way back to Canada, knowing the whole time they were protected. CSIS knew about them and did nothing. The RCMP knew about them, did nothing. The Liberal Party knew and did nothing. This is what media doesn't want to talk about. This is the truth that Canada doesn't want its citizens to know.
The plane crashed into the waters off the southern coast of Ireland, killing all 329 passengers and crew aboard. This tragedy still stands as the largest act of mass murder in Canadian history. Suspicion for the bombing quickly came to rest.
Take note of this sign and name for future reference. We'll be talking and linking this organization in part 2. It's one of at least 25 organizations that are all linked to China. And it's all part of, like I was saying a couple minutes ago, the radical Islam and the Khalistan movement. And this is why these two leftist extremist organizations funded by China do the exact same things in order to train their youth and allow it to keep fermenting and building, all happening in countries where they've used our own system to protect them and then allow them to infiltrate the systems of that government. And Canada is number one for the breeding ground of all of these extremist organizations. And we're seeing it today with people from Iran who are part of the hierarchy of that radical regime that run Iran that are fleeing to Canada, protected, flying right in under the radar, and have been for the last 8 years. What government has been in charge for the last 10 years?
On a group calling itself Babar Khalsa, a militant Sikh separatist group whose members included Talwinder Singh Parmar, Inderjit Singh Rayat, Ripudaman Singh Malik, Ajaib Singh Bagri, and Surjan Singh Gill.
Now we're slowly adding more names to the list.
It was later to emerge that Parmar and other members of the Babar Khalsa sect had been under surveillance by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, or CSIS, in the weeks leading up to the attack. CSIS surveillance of the Babar Khalsa sect included physically trailing suspects, as well as wiretapping their phones, resulting in hundreds of hours of taped conversations between the main suspects in the Air India bombing. Incredibly, the vast majority of these wiretaps were erased by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service before they could ever be used against any of the suspects in a criminal proceeding. This resulted in the acquittal of Malik and Bagri in the so-called Air India trial, which ended in March of 2005.
Now, why were they erased? Why? We'll figure this out in part 2.
Canadians were shocked and appalled by the fact that over $100 million of taxpayer money had been spent in a 20-year investigation that had resulted in the conviction of only one man in connection with the bombing, Inderjit Singh Rayat. Responding to political pressure, Prime Minister Stephen Harper appointed the Air India Inquiry in 2006 to look into why the investigation had been so badly bungled. It didn't take long for the inquiry to uncover some startling and troubling findings.
More astounding revelations of the Air India inquiry today, as the picture of what happened in the days leading up to the bombing grew more disturbing. The inquiry heard from 2 witnesses, both with stories of a high-level CSIS expert who seemed to know an Air India plane would be brought down, that it was only a question of when. And both recalled their horror when just a few days later it happened. Terry Malevsky reports.
Surprises are now normal at this inquiry, but this was extraordinary. One of Canada's top lawyers testifying that he thought CSIS had prior knowledge of the Air India bombing.
I was greatly upset. I said, holy expletive, they knew. They knew.
It all started here, poolside at a California hotel during a pause in a terrorism case. Chatting in deck chairs, Graham Pinos said a top CSIS official told him that Sikh extremists would try to attack a plane.
I have an absolutely clear recollection of the event and the circumstances. It was something that shocked me. An element of Sikhs was in the Indian community in Canada, and that he perceived them as being dangerous and they're likely to bring a plane down.
He was the head of counter-terrorism at CSIS headquarters in Ottawa, Mel Deschênes. And Pinos said he met Deschênes again 3 weeks after the bombing and was amazed that he seemed to know where the bomb was placed.
He knew within that 3-week period of the damage and where the bomb had been placed in the aircraft.
Pinos did not say Deschênes told him he knew details of the plot beforehand, only that he seemed to know. And another lawyer who was in California for the same case told the same story.
Mr. Deschênes advised me that he had to leave.
Did he give a reason as to why he had to leave?
He had received a call from Canada. There was an urgent problem with Sikh extremists in Vancouver, and he had to leave to go to Vancouver immediately.
Again, that was before the bombing. Afterwards, she said,
my immediate reaction was, even when they know something's going to happen, they can't stop it.
MacDonald did not say Deschênes talked about a bomb or a plane, but she insisted he knew something.
My reaction was exactly the same as Mr. Pinos. Holy shit, they knew, they knew, they knew.
Why were CSIS working on the threat days before the bombing, but unable to prevent it from taking place? Why was the wiretap evidence destroyed? Why have 23 years of investigation provided only one conviction on one count of manslaughter in connection with the largest mass murder in Canadian history? The startling answer to these troubling questions may come from this document. Entitled Tab 89, it contains the transcripts of RCMP interrogations of Ajaib Singh Bagri in October of 2000. In one passage, RCMP Staff Sergeant Jim Hunter tells Bagri the following about Surjan Singh Gill, who inexplicably pulled out of the Babar Khalsa group just 3 days before the bombing took place. Yep, Surjan trying to back out. Now, why is he trying to back out? Cold feet? There's been some damage control already because Talwinder knows that he's trying to back out. And of course, why is he trying to back out? Well, because his CSIS agents have told him to back out. They told him to get out of there, that things are happening, and you can't be seen as part of that. In a transcription from the interrogation of Ripudaman Malik from that same Tab 89 document, Staff Sergeant Don Adam of the RCMP tells Malik that the wiretaps of Parmar and others were destroyed to cover up CSIS' role in the bombings. And you know, if you were a policeman, why would a government agency destroy the very tapes that would, you know, of Mr. Parmar's? Why would... Can you think of why?
Ken, can you? Why else would they? This is, again, where's the media? Oh, I'm not regulated by CRTC. I'm not part of the propaganda machine. This is why I started this channel. Sorry, so sorry. Just the facts, just the truth, please.
Perhaps if your agent was right in the middle of it, and then it happened, and now you were all going to look horrible, you might have a reason to cover that up, wouldn't you? If true, the implications of these RCMP statements are troubling. Surjan Singh Gill was not an incidental player in the Babar Khalsa group. In fact, he was one of its founding members, and his name was on the documents which incorporated the group as a religious society in British Columbia. Then, 3 days before...
Protected by our own charter. Who created that charter? Oh, right. That would be Pierre. Interesting. The fake charter. The one that gives the government the right to pick and choose who and what religion they can go after. But yet, this whole chapter, this whole supposed religion, is running amok and is growing at an exponential rate, which we're seeing all across Canada, previous episodes, cause havoc and doing the job of, well, what the Liberal regime wants. Spread fear, hate, and division in order to guarantee them power. They prefer a majority government, but as long as they don't lose that power, like they have today passing this Bill C-5, this is all they care about. Power. They don't care about you. They don't care about Canada. And this is obvious. It's all right here on this anniversary. And nobody's talking about it.
Before the bombing, he dissociated himself from the group. Then, in September 2000, just weeks before the arrest of Malik and Bagri and the interrogations which admitted his role as a CSIS informant, Surjan Singh Gill fled Canada, never to return. If the RCMP's own officers are right, and CSIS in fact had a mole working inside the terrorist group which carried out the worst terrorist atrocity in Canadian history, what does this tell us about Canadian counterterrorism intelligence? What does it mean that CSIS officials were talking about problems with Sikh extremists who wanted to bring down a plane in the week before the bombing took place? Why did CSIS erase hundreds of hours of wiretap evidence that could have been used to convict the main suspects of the bombing? If the system was blinking red, and so much was known about the group and their intentions, why were basic security steps not taken to ensure that unclaimed luggage would not be put on board an Air India flight? These are questions that every concerned Canadian citizen must be asking their elected representatives.
Now, what do we get? Well, we get this crap.
40 years later, though, do you believe that Canada has done enough to acknowledge and learn from this attack?
I've met with some families in Toronto, and I've had a number of conversations today, and I think it's important that we do more. There's a real desire for this experience to be taught in schools so that Canadians have a much better understanding of the depth of the loss. At the same time, what I'm seeing here, in Cork County is what an impact this has made to the community here. Virtually anyone I've met have some connection to what happened 40 years ago. I'm at the Cork Airport, and there's a commemoration book here about the last 50 years of the airport, and what's highlighted is this tragedy. We need to do a much better job in educating Canadians and the world of the impact of the worst terrorist attack involving Canadians. And it's something that I know the families are seeking, but more importantly, it's something that we all need to learn from.
And the stories, though, are still being told. Can you talk to us about that before we go? You met with Lord Mayor of Cork and his driver. Tell us about that.
Well, what's moving is Finbar Archer, who...
This man is completely incompetent. He is a puppet. Not only does he have no idea about what it is to be Canadian, he's doing exactly what the Liberal regime wants him to. And take note of the so-called journalists. CTV and CBC, and they don't have journalists. They have reporters. They report what the government wants. They pass a narrative. You just heard their narrative. Ready? Get the ball. Nothing to see here. Nothing to see. Nothing about this inquiry that happened. Nothing about the mole. Nothing about the infiltration. Nothing about all of these arrows pointing back towards all of the systems that are supposed to be here to protect us. Nothing. In part 2, I'm going to go on and start exposing how it wasn't just, like I said, the two people. They're at war. They have been knocking people off. These T organizations have been knocking all of these people off out of fear that something or someone may talk, or someone may actually get information out that'll actually bring more of this front and center and allow for justice to finally happen. Here's the final kicker. When you go to the government website, to actually look at the papers of the inquiry. This is all supposed to be public knowledge. It's actually illegal for the government to hide these reports. And considering the technology we have today, and that they were already in digital format, put into the government website as all of this computer world was coming forward, now when you click on the actual inquiry, click, we have archived this page and will not be updating it. I'm going to just expand this screen so that you can read what I'm reading. Where is it? News release. The government of Canada today tabled the Air India Flight 182. This is June 17th, 2010. The destruction of Air India Flight 182 remains the worst terror attack. It was a cowardly, despicable, and senseless act, said Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Our government launched this inquiry to bring closure to those, blah, 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 blah. September 2006, the government kept its promises to launch an inquiry and Commission for Retired Justice, major scrutiny. We thank the Commissioner Major for all his work, blah, 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 blah. And okay, to retain, there it is. There's supposed to be the copy. There is supposed to be the link. Oh. Ready? Gone. Gone. You can go ahead and click. It's gone. There's nothing. All of this data, all of it is gone. Not a single bit remains. Deleted by the Trudeau liberals, the Carney liberals of today. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your post-national fascist state. Where is the transparency? I've already shown you more than any news outlet in Canada will show you. In fact, I don't see a single independent digging this deep. And I've just scratched the surface. Stay tuned for part 2, because I am going to be showing you not just this 40 years ago, this horrific day that happened, that I remember. I actually had, where I grew up was a very, very diverse, multicultural area. And a lot of the Sikh and Indian parts of those communities that I was going to school with, playing with in the playgrounds, I watched it destroy them. It affected them in a way that I never forgot. And our media has been trying to hide. I won't let that slide. I'm going to show you the hit jobs. I'm going to show you how the cops and everybody know about it. I'm even going to show you that the BC government is just kind of not doing anything. This goes on and on. In fact, I've got a couple really good interviews where there's journalists that are fleeing for their lives, that are under protection, that are going to speak. And they're going to talk, and I'm going to give you the links so you can watch them in their entirety and actually go, holy shit. Canada is a breeding ground for these extremists to fly all around the world and spread and murder and just everything from extortion, bribery, you name it, all coming from Canada. Allowed by our government, propagated by the media, hidden by CSIS and the RCMP. And instead, what do? Blame India. That's right. Blame India. Right. Stay tuned. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. If you can donate, please do. I don't make anything off this channel. Some of the video I showed you is over 16 years old. It takes me days. This file I've been working on for over 2 weeks. And I'm going to try and do it in 2. I might be a 3-part series, but I'm going to try and give it to you in 2. But like I always say, I can't do a 50-part series, but I don't like leaving people high and dry. So I'm going to try and make sure that by the time you're done watching all of these series, you will be able to absorb and understand just how evil Canada has become and just complicit in letting this happen. It's disgusting. Until next time, you guys, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. You've been watching the Canadian Citizen Journal. I'm Alias to Guy. Stay informed.